watching Hulk Hogan and a champion's gleam. Now he's grown with the mission, got stories to tell. From the indie halls echoing the ring bell. Every Northwest hero, every rising star. If they're stepping in the ring, he's not far. Oregon Wrestling Observer, where the passion runs strong, never stops, never over. Josh James in the chair, hit record, hit the stage, spotlighting every fighter on the PNW page. Oregon Wrestling Observer, feel the crowd rise up as the voices get louder. From Oregon, Canada, and Washington, he's the man with the plan, bringing wrestling to the world. One show for the fans. Yeah, yeah, raise your hands, hey. Yeah, 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 raise your hands, hit the mat, feel the roar tonight.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joshua James, and welcome back to Oregon Wrestling Observer. We are back live. It's been too long, everybody. Been a 6 months break from YouTube in general, but it feels good to be back. And with me is a special guest, my good friend, Bulldog Bob Brown Jr. How you doing, my friend?
I'll tell you, just look at that video. My God, I'm looking at history there in the making. You know, I saw the very beginning there with Dr. Luther. That's a good one to start with for sure. So,
Yeah.
Very much so. I'm glad that he's doing well now. He's finally getting his due in AEW finally. After years of toiling on the industry and in FMW and so on and so forth, and so now he's able to do his things. So it's good for him.
Oh, yeah, I love Dr. Luther. He was personally one of my favorites, and love talking to Doc. He's great.
Yes.
That interview, I can tell you right now, was so fun to do. Like, the one thing is, like, you can never tell if he's, like, in character or he's, like, legitimately crazy. It's like Drexel in a way.
It's a bit of both, so you just never know. Just take the good with the bad.
Yeah, true. But Bulldog, I'm happy to have you as a guest. We've been planning on having you as a guest for a while, but then I took a break. But when I first met you, you were a ring announcer, but you were telling me off on the camera that you wrestled. I want to know about, like, how did you get involved with wrestling? How did you first start? And who's the one that got you into it?
Pretty bizarre story. There's a lot of different ways that people have gotten into the wrestling industry. I probably have a very unusual story that probably beats a lot of people. It all started I've been a longtime fan for years. Let me get that out of the way. My first brush with fame was meeting Gene Kiniski. His son was going to university at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada, and I think that was Nick that was going to school there. And I met Gene as he was coming down from the aquatic center at Simon Fraser University, coming down the stairs. All 6'6" of him. He's a monster of a guy. He was a monster of a guy. And, he was every bit of what you'd see on TV kind of thing. But I'd watched the wrestling for years, for All-Star Wrestling out of Vancouver. And then there was a show that came on that I'd seen for the first time ever in 1983 called Stampede Wrestling. And that really was an interesting thing because it was a live show or taped in Calgary at the Pavilion in front of a large crowd, not a studio. And it took snippets of matches to make the show. And, it was a unique experience to see that. But what happened was that in 1985, yes, we're going back that far, I had been a fan of a radio show called Sports Nightline BC out of Vancouver, Canada. And Jim Goddard was the host, and he had a variety of different sports things on. And one time he decided he was going to have on Stampede Wrestling, which I thought was phenomenal because Stampede Wrestling had sold originally to Vince back in 1984 and was making a comeback to live events in October of 85. And so, this was a few months before the event started. And so, he was promoting this show and he was talking about some guy named Brian that was going to be running these guys on the show, et cetera, et cetera. Well, comes the day of the show and Brian, I've never even heard of this guy. I never even showed up. Of course, the guys didn't show up, et cetera, et cetera. So Jim started basting down the show, just lambasting everybody. And I called up Jim Goddard. Actually, I talked to him on the phone. and said, what are you doing? I said, I don't even know who this Brian kid is, or guy or whatever. If you really want to talk to somebody from Stampede Wrestling, I've got some numbers if you need to talk to somebody. I had both Stu Hart's business number, which was in the phone book, and then also the off-air number as well, which I had given him as well, and told him, I said, talk to him and see if you can arrange something. And I hammered on this guy for a few weeks, and finally, Jim said, I'll make the call, and he did, and he was able to get Bruce Hart. He was supposed to have Honky Tonk Man on the show, but Honky Tonk couldn't make it that night, and so they ended up having Tom McGee. Yes, believe it or not, that goes back that far. And anybody who remembers Tom McGee will remember some history of that. You'll watch it on YouTube somewhere. But Jim asked me if I'd like to be on the show. Well, I was an 18-year-old kid. I said, I'm jumping at the chance to be broadcast, at that time, province-wide, British Columbia, Sportsline Land, BC. You're going from Vancouver up to Terrace, BC, and all points in between. So at 1 o'clock in the morning, we're doing Stampede Wrestling Talk on CKNW radio. And off air, Bruce Hart asked me what my vision was in wrestling. And I said, well, I don't think I'm big enough. I said, but maybe I could be an announcer or something like that. And he says, well, we know we have Waylon and that sort of thing. He says, but if we're doing shows somewhere else that he's not at, then maybe we can use you. I said, great. So that was in our back pocket. He said, I said, personally, I'd like to go to the Mecca. At that time, the Mecca to me for pro wrestling was the Stampede Victoria Pavilion. Obviously we talk about the Portland Sports Arena, as the Mecca. We talk about San Francisco, the Cow Palace. Everybody had that is really their niche area that they would go to for shows. So everything would happen there. And I made a venture Christmas night out to Calgary, 16 and a half hours on a bus, Greyhound bus out to Calgary, and went and stayed at a hotel in the northwest part of Calgary, and went down to the Victoria Pavilion. And Stu Hart had procured me a ticket in the front row to watch this show, which I was amazed at. And afterwards, Bruce came up to me and after everybody had left pretty much, and asked me how I thought it. And I said, this was wonderful. I said, I wish we had more of this kind of thing. And he says, you were talking about being an announcer one time. He says, maybe you can do a sort of like an audition. I said, okay. He says, when the next guy comes out of the curtain, he says, go ahead and in your best announcer voice, announce who this guy is. What was Bad News Alan? Bad News Bernard.
Oh, that's cool.
And I remember News looking at me. He said, "What the hell is this shit?" And it's just like, and I laughed at that, and I got to be good friends with Bruce over the years, and it was return to the shows back in '86, back in British Columbia, and Terry Fetter, who was nicknamed Shadow. Because he was always like the shadow of the Hearts. He'd always follow behind them like a shadow kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Was the front man for the shows in Vancouver, and told me that the announcer that was supposed to be announcing in Mission, BC, which is about 45 minutes east of where Vancouver was, wasn't able to make the show the next night. He says, could you do it? 18-year-old kid? Yes. Okay, no problem. I'd love to. I was just turning 19 at that time. I hadn't even turned 19. And he brought me into the Mission show. Now, this was a double-edged sword, though, because not only was I going to be announcing that night, but Terry hadn't postered the town. So here we were at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, putting up posters throughout the town, trying to get people to go to the show that Terry hadn't promoted. Still, he had a good turnout. It was like about 180 or something like that in the Mission Legion or Lions Hall. So, I mean, it did all right, but still, I mean, you don't want to wait till the last second like that.
Yeah, for sure.
I announced that show there and went back out to Calgary in December of '86. What was at that show there that I had been actually in contact over the years with Smith Hart, actually in Calgary, and he invited me to go to the back entrance of the Victoria Pavilion, and So actually, I got to go to the back of the Victoria Pavilion and got to meet all the wrestlers there. And I overheard a conversation going on with Duke Myers and Cuban Assassin Angel Acevedo there. And it was about Dynamite Kid. And Dynamite had been injured in a match in Hamilton, Ontario a month earlier, where he'd wrestled Don Morocco and Bob Orton and had ruptured his back, and actually flew to Calgary from Ontario back to Calgary to have the surgery done. And so, Duke was sort of filling me in on all this stuff that was going on. And when I got home, of course, 19-year-old kid, I'm trying to find out more information. So what do? I called the WWF offices. Of course, they go, it's not on TV. We don't know anything about it. Tried to shut me down, kind of thing. Okay, so I was unabridged. I wasn't going to stop, checking this out. So I thumbed through a bunch of magazines at home, because I was a wrestling fan collector of magazines, and I saw this phone number for GC London Publishing, and ended up calling them and was put through to Bill Apter and talked to him about the situation. He says, we're putting a magazine to bed right now. He said, can we call you back in 45 minutes? I said, sure. I said, no problem. And I was at home with my mom in Port Moody, British Columbia. And I thought, yeah, you'll never hear from this guy again, whatever. He's trying to blow you off kind of thing. So I went upstairs. I'm in the bathroom and the phone rings and my mother answers the phone. And she says, you may want to take this call. I said, why? She says, it's New York calling. I said, what? Well, I get on the phone. There's a three-way call, actually a four-way call. It was myself, Bill Apter, Stu Sachs, and Craig Peters. And they were saying, you might have some information we'd like to know about. I said, well, I was just in Calgary. Gave them the whole scoop on Dynamite and that sort of thing. And they were like going, we didn't even know about this, the way, this has all gone down. He says, how did you even know? And I said, well, I was a fan out in Calgary. He said, we can't put that in a magazine. You were a fan, So somewhere in a magazine, and I'm still trying to find, I had it, and I now misplaced it. I can't find it anymore. I'm listed as the media liaison for Stampede Wrestling. So that was my claim to fame. And I started that magazine business. I started giving them the arena ports and finally got the ratings for Stampede Wrestling in the pages of Inside Wrestling and the Wrestler PWI, which I thought was rather cool because now we were actually getting back to where we had been many years ago of actually having our territory covered. And I was also including the belts from All Star Wrestling called the UWA at that time, and giving them their nod as well. But the problem with that was that Tomco wasn't giving me the champions on a timely basis. And finally, Bill Apter, pulled the plug, and so it was just the Stampede Wrestling guys. And from that point on, he'd actually contacted Bruce Hart and sort of weaseled me out of the picture kind of thing. So it was just him and Bruce that were doing things. So I needed to find a job sort of thing. So there was a magazine that was on the stands, a new magazine called Gold Belt Wrestling. And there was an article in there that was several months out of date. I mean, it was like horrendous. Now, I didn't know about the magazine business at the time. I thought it was regularly, updated. Well, It's like 2 or 3 months behind, but this was even further because the guy was getting tapes out of Ontario, which were about 6 weeks out of date before he even got them. So by the time you added that to the magazines, it'd be about 6 months out, from what had happened. So I called up the editor and told her what the scoop was, and I started writing some column. I wrote a column for Gold Belt Wrestling, and then I wrote a second one, and then we had a big falling out, and so I ended up not writing for them anymore. Well, it was just at the tail end of that I went to Los Angeles on another bus, 24-hour bus, to Los Angeles to the Ambassador Hotel for the first time I'd ever been to the WFIA convention, Wrestling Fans International Association, and I'm now a board member actually of the WFIA now. But at that time, they had guys like Victor Rivera, David Schultz was there, Lou Albano, Queen Kong, Matilda from Glow, and a couple of others that were there. And I got to meet with George Napolitano. And I asked him about getting a job there, with his stuff, because he was doing all these magazines and that sort of thing. He says, actually, I'm doing a fanzine kind of thing. If you notice, all my stuff is basically photos. There's very little text in there. He says, but I'm writing an article for Wrestling World under the name of Jose Sanchez of the Caribbean Report in Wrestling World. Maybe you give Steve Cicerelli a call and see if he can use you there. I said, okay. So I got home and I called Steve Cicerelli. I'm making all these calls. I mean, who does that nowadays? I mean, I was actually marketing at that time and networking. And I called Steve and I told him about the situation and so on. He says, well, we're putting a magazine to bed in about 3 weeks. If you can get me an article and pictures in that time frame, we'll take a look at it. If we can use it, we'll run it. And that's when Northwest Canadian Wrestling News was born. In fact, one of the very first pictures that is in there is an 8.5 by 11 picture of Mike Shaw and Brian Pillman Muckin Singh from Edmonton, Alberta, where Brian's a bloody mess and Muckin Singh's beating him up a lot and that sort of thing. There's an interesting thing about that picture. That picture came as a result because I was basically filming and photographing the matches in Calgary and Edmonton. And I'd seen this match going on with Pillman and Muckin Singh, so I was taking some pictures. And Shaw had seen that I was on the other side of the ring taking pictures. And so he grabbed Pillman, dragged him over to my side of the ring. So, I shot this one picture up of Pillman and Muckin Singh. And it made it was actually the first picture. They made it a black and white. It was a gorish picture, but they made it black and white. But I had several other pictures that were in that magazine. Well, all of a sudden, these people that weren't getting any press were suddenly getting press, especially in the Calgary and Vancouver area. Alan Bolte, I think, was still running on the stuff in Portland. So that whole Northwest area, San Francisco, Portland, Calgary, Vancouver, we were covering. So that was great. We were actually getting some coverage. And I did that magazine for about 8.5 years altogether. And then I did 3 other articles for Wrestling's Main Event for Sandy Krebs. But in the meantime, all that, All-Star Wrestling and Stampede Wrestling have both folded in 1989. So there really wasn't a venue anymore for shows to go at or get magazine articles on, etc. But there were a couple of people that had tried and failed to run shows under the banner of All-Star Wrestling or Pros in Canada or whatever else. And so I was continuing to cover some of that in the magazines. Unfortunately, the magazines weren't that frequent, so I was able to have a little bit of time gap, so it wasn't a really really dry article kind of thing, really no meat in it sort of thing. But it was probably, I guess it was around 1991 or so that a wrestler under the name of Michelle Starr was looking to do a sport card show. Him and Vern Siebert were doing sport cards along with Tim Wilson, who had been a timekeeper and ring host for WWF and Stampede Wrestling over the years, were involved in sport cards. And they're running this one event in Pitt Meadows, British Columbia. And it was there that they had the building for the entire day. And there was a brilliant idea that Starr had about running a wrestling show that night. Since they were doing the building for the whole day, they might as well do it. So they contracted a bunch of different guys and they did the show. And that was the birth of what was known as British Columbia Wrestling Association, but there was already an amateur group called that, so they changed it to West Coast Championship Wrestling. Yeah, WCCW, and it wouldn't change until ECCW, probably until 1996, late 95, when they split away from another group, and they started running the Vancouver Island. That's when it became ECCW. And it was January of 96, actually, Jimmy Superfly Snuka became the first ECCW champion, defeating John Rambo in a cage match. But it was a night of cage matches, actually. And it was the first match that I had on that show. I was one of the first matches. I had the very first match with Adam Firestorm, Ellen Torcha. Cool. And so, he and I, did our thing. And then we were interrupted by, at that time, the Glamour Order of Discipline, which was Michelle Starr and Johnny Canuck, they destroyed Torch because they were setting up a program with him. But going back to 1991, so Starr was running these shows here, And at that time, Morwinell had moved on to UFC kind of stuff, and Jonathan Sayers, who was another manager, had moved back to Winnipeg. So they were kind of managerless out here. So I sort of put my name in, to offer. And so, I was trained a little bit there and became a manager for Michelle Starr, the Badger, and Vicious Fern Siebert with a hoity-toity British guy by the name of Lord Jonathan Flash. Lord Jonathan Flash had his House of Lords. Everybody else was of the Commons kind of thing. We were the House of Lords. And I did that through 1992. My claim to fame there was a match where Colonel De Beers was wrestling Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and I was managing Colonel, and he beat up Colonel, and Snuka grabbed me, threw me into the ropes, and delivered one of those big chops at that time.
No.
And yes, it's all that and then some, I can tell you. He's about as solid as they come. But it was November of '93 that I actually ended up being in a match, mixed tag match with myself and the Bachelor against Tim Flowers and his girlfriend at the time, Wendy, who really wasn't smart to the business at all. And she was, for a girl 110 pounds, she was like a brick, and so, everything I felt we felt. But, so we ended up doing the finish, and Flowers gave me a pile driver, and I was carried out a stretcher, and fans were all happy about it. And so that's basically where that started. Now, where Bulldog Bob Brown Jr. came out was we were wrestling on Vancouver Island at the fair, the Vancouver Island exhibition. And I was going to be wrestling Ole Olsen, Todd Olsen, on the show. And he said, he says, you remind me an awful lot of when I wrestled Bob Brown out in the Maritimes. He says, you should go out there as Bulldog Bob Brown Jr. And I thought, is that okay? And, and so, because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And Ole's like, oh, yeah, that'll be fine. I said, okay, fine. So I went out there, and it was amazing. People were coming up to me all the time. Oh, I remember your dad wrestling and so forth. It's like, the illegitimate son of Bob Brown Jr. Bob Brown. I claimed the junior, but I wasn't related to him. But no, I'd known Bob for years. Right at the tail end of All-Star Wrestling through his days when he was booking in Stampede and also for Tony Condello out in Winnipeg. So that there was some lineage in there. But Bulldog Bob Brown Jr. sort of took off like wildfire. And so then you had to come up with your catchphrase. Of course, everybody else has theirs. So mine was the best abs in the business. Worked hard for 100% natural. Of course, then I'd always be complaining to the managers or the announcers. I would say, you've got a keg. And I said, yeah, well, they're well protected, So that was my whole deal there with that. But I mean, I enjoyed that, for so many years doing that. And then, you come back, 180 back to the announcing stuff. I started doing announcing for, I'd done some shows actually wrestling through Portland and Vancouver and so on for years for ECCW down here before they ran into a problem with the licensing board. But then I was able to work for a number of other events around in this area here. And it was there that I ended up going into booking, which I'd done a little bit of with ECCW, and really expanded upon it for both Sandy Barr and Tito Carrion, who were doing their shows. They were the promoters, but I was helping them put together the matches and so on. And I'll never forget, I had one match I was going to go with for Tito. And it was this really big guy, Triple X, he was wrestling as. And I can't remember, I think it was like Drew Gage or something that he was wrestling against. Really small kid, right? And then, thought of a squash thing maybe that we do. And, Tito's like, oh, amigo, we can't do that. We can't beat up this guy like that. We can't do that. And I said, yeah, but it makes sense. It's a big guy. But anyway, so we ended up doing something, and I don't think it worked out as well. But, but Tito allowed me to sort of have some fun with the shows, and I did that for the years, and the same thing with Sandy, and we formed good friendships out of both of those, and then Mark Dykstra with PNPW, I got into that, basically he was looking to move Richie Magnet out of the booking position, and he tapped me to take over, and I did that for a period of years before they sold to our CPW. Basically took over Championship Pro Wrestling with Dean Dobson and Sam Sims, and it was good until this other guy took over, sort of wormed his way in, and I was left, without a position. And DOA came calling, and I started announcing for them. So if there's old shows that we see pictures of at the University Park Community Center, now they're called the Charles Jordan Center. Back in the early days of DOA, back in like 2008. And then from there, I mean, basically sort of everything sort of led itself to another. So I did announcing it at a lot of places, and nowadays I do color commentating for Power Pro Wrestling out of Eugene.
Oh, that's awesome. Power Pro Wrestling. I
Sorry for rambling on there.
No, just like hearing your stories is like the whole thing where Bob Brown Jr. name came from, and like just hearing all these names, and you going with ECCW, and it was making me think, like, at the time when you were just telling me about these stories, like, I bet there's some people who are watching thinking like, why don't you just go to another independent or anything else like that? But back then, territories were just pretty much like tough to go to now, because
not only that, but also remember, you had no television. I mean, that was
exactly, yeah.
When the WWF came in, and they started really going after things probably in the late 80s or so. 84 was early for Stampede Wrestling, and but by 89 they'd taken over All Star Wrestling and the time slot for Stampede Wrestling. Excuse me. And so there really wasn't an opportunity for you to get television matches anywhere. Yeah. And so even footage of shows is really tough to come by unless somebody had a camcorder, which at that time wasn't cheap. Buying a camcorder was like about $2,000 to buy one. And nowadays you can buy them for like $100, if that. And now digital. And I mean, the phenomenal suites you can get, like your setup right now, which back in the day would have probably cost you $10,000. Probably cost you $300 now. But the WWF had stolen all these talents. And again, I'm not begrudging these guys for making their bucks, because they toiled themselves for years in making no money, and finally they were finally being on the world stage. The problem was they didn't have a feeder system. They tried later on with Ohio Valley Wrestling and with Smoky Mountain Wrestling and a couple of other places in Memphis for a little bit, but the problem was the costs were so high. The guys that were working those shows, whether it be the start of The Undertaker or Rocky Johnson, weren't willing to work for the $50 or whatever it was that was being offered. They wanted 10 or 20 times that. And so a promoter couldn't possibly run the shows. Remember, Mid-South Coliseum, back in its heyday, was averaging 10,000 fans. Now, granted, the cheap tickets, like $5 or less. But now these shows were drawing, 1,500. And so, I mean, that's even at $10, that's not a huge amount of money to pay for the building, the talent, and everything else. And so one by one, those TV stations had gone away. One by one, those talents had gone away. And so there wasn't really a feeder system. They do a performance center nowadays for WWE. But again, I don't see a lot of guys being brought in to the next level kind of thing. They bring a few guys into NXT, but they don't really elevate them. And then, of course, recently they've had their big purge where they've, after WrestleMania, they get this big purge and they start sending all these guys out. Well, take a look at the list of most of those people. Most of those people are young. They've kept the older guys. And again, it's nothing against the older guys. Don't get me wrong. I don't dispel any of the older guys. Yeah. But you're not replanting the seeds for the future. What you've done now is you're basically hoping to God that somewhere there's going to be another Hulk Hogan kind of thing where you're going to magically make it appear. They thought they could get that with Rocky Johnson or Dwayne Johnson, and they did for a brief time. Steve Austin, but they're gone. John Cena, he's gone. Roman Reigns is the next one, and he's soon to go. But you take a look at this roster now. I don't think there's anybody that's in the top level that's 40 years of age or under. There's nobody, and so they're not building to the future. AEW is the same thing. Again, nothing against these guys, whether it be Adam Copeland or Chris Jericho or anybody else, but let's face it, they're living on borrowed time, and so at some point there's going to have to be another guy that is that same level that can get to that that pinnacle, and they're running out of time, and that's why we're seeing ratings of both these shows drawing poorly, is because people have seen it, done it, watched it, gave it back, kind of thing. There's nothing more. Again, the reason why I'm stuck with the independents, whether I've been to Roundtable Pro Wrestling, which has done its shows in Vancouver. I've been to BCW. I've been to DOA. I've been, as I said, color commentator for POW. There's a lot of young guys on the show. Sure, there's some older guys, but there's a lot of young kids that are filtered in there. And because of that, they're able to sort of cycle it through. So those guys that are younger are actually able to elevate themselves a little bit. And so those older guys are starting to back away a little bit. And because of that, you're starting to get a good following. I mean, I don't think there's been a DOA or POW show recently that hasn't done a good house, of some sort.
Oh my gosh, yeah, DOA is like awesome. Like they always delivered. Every person, every wrestler, every like fans, like, oh my gosh, like there's been times where I was gonna try to get a ticket, like a front row seat ticket for DOA, and I look at their website and say sold out, and every time I'm there, it's just like, holy crap, there's so much people.
Well, what's really good is that it's an all-inclusive event, so it's very different from my day when I went to shows where people weren't out of any sort. And nowadays it's like everybody under the sun that's there, which is it's great because they feel it's a safe place to go to, and that's great that because of that we're able to get that camaraderie amongst everybody. But I was going to mention something about Oregon Pro Wrestling School. Here's a place that has filtered a lot of the guys into DOA, into POW, BCW, Roundtable Pro, etc. These guys have been able to go to several different promotions. There's a few of them that even go to Washington State and do the shows up there. Bedford, they do shows down there. So they're able to get, some regular bookings. But that's the cycle though, is being able to train those guys, get them to a level that they're able to get their foot in the door and then start elevating up. I mean, guys, let's give some examples. I don't want to point anybody out specifically, and I'm not doing that to say, oh, they're very, very good versus very, very bad. But guys, people like Amira, for example, who started off as a fan in the shows, started going to shows, getting onto shows, and so on. With her Oregon Pro Wrestling School, finally elevated to the status she was in POW Pro Wrestling and DOA, and went to Japan. And was in 3 different promotions there. We've seen guys who've been, Jaden, for example, is another one that's done well over the years because he's been able to cycle himself up. He doesn't actually have to blast himself up to the top. He's able to sort of cycle himself up to a point where people can get behind him, kind of thing. You take a look at the Hammer Brothers. You take a look at the Aces. There's tons of them that are listed in there. And they're all able to get there because they're not having to suddenly get to the top right away. There's opportunities for them to grow and develop. And because of that, the fans can start to get behind them. And so now, as you can see, when you go to like a DOA show or POW Pro Wrestling show, and those are the ones I've been to recently, the atmosphere behind all of them is like what you'd expect for somebody that's been in the business 10 years. But because it's been rapidly accelerated, but they're still able to get into slow enough pace that they can get to that next level without feeling that they're stepping on anybody's toes, or that they're being shoved down somebody's throat, like guys like Eric Watts or David Reed, where they are part of Reed Flair. They were pushed way too soon, in my opinion. Sure, they were family members, but they were pushed so hard that people just threw their heads up in despair. I mean, Rock didn't make it, right off the bat when he first got into the business. He had to pay his dues in Memphis as Flex Cavana. What a hell of a name that was.
I know, right?
And then he was sort of like in the midst of the Nation of Domination kind of thing. But there were guys that had been there a little bit before, like guys like Ron Simmons and so on,
Yeah.
that had were like the main guys, and then he was able to sort of go in behind them until he was ready to be able to take the next level. So I mean, that lineage helps out a great deal, because if you fail, accelerating so fast up to the top, you're done for. And that I think could go to Tom McGee, for example, as a good example. Tom McGee was a big muscle guy. Vince really liked the big guys, back in the 80s. He liked the big muscle guys. And he sent a bunch to Calgary to try and season them to become stars for the WWF. Guys like Bill Kazmaier. Steve DeSalvo was a bit of an anomaly. He actually could work a little bit.
Yeah.
But there were guys like Tom McGee who couldn't. Dave Barbie, who had been on the WWF as an enhancement talent. And so on. There were a bunch of other. Ted Arcidi was another one. Big muscle guys, right? Big, huge guys. Vince loved them to death. Well, we know what happened with all that, but we don't need to go there. But that was the aura, right? But that those guys didn't have a chance to sort of move up the ladder a little bit. They were just suddenly thrust in the spotlight. You can't compete on that level. People aren't going to buy it, and they didn't. And they turned their backs in droves. And so people, guys like Bill and Tom and so on had very short careers. Steve DeSalvo didn't have that long of a career either. He's in real estate, making phenomenal money there. Obviously a lot more than the wrestling business. But, he was one of the few guys who actually sort of was able to get to other areas and be, moving up from the bottom to the top kind of thing. Wasn't thrust in the spotlight, so to speak. But a lot of these guys today, we are starting to see that now, where they're actually able to develop. But beforehand, no. And I think we lost a period, I would say from about 1990 to about 2000, we lost a real generation of talents that moved away. I mean, the TV was off, so a lot of those guys had gone. They weren't training the next generation of guys. It wasn't until probably the late 90s or so. Ron Hutchison was a great one that was able to train guys like Edge and Christian, Sin Bodie, Gail Kim, Trish Stratus, and so on. Phenomenal guy, just great talent. And Rip Rogers, who had trained a bunch of guys in Ohio Valley Wrestling, and he's going to be nominated. He's actually up for an award for Trainer of the Year for CAC this year. And I'm very proud to have him at my dinner table on Tuesday, Wednesday night there at the CAC. So I'm sure he's going to be telling a few stories because, when you talk about the Ripperoonie, oh my goodness, he is full of stories. I'm looking forward to the days he's talking about his days in Calgary, where he'd walk out of the dressing room with a bunch of pink balloons and look like he's blowing them. It's it's just. I mean, you see these things. I mean, it's just it's silly, or talk about the Midnight Cowboys, which Kerry Brown hated with a passion, because they're all dressed up in pink. And basically, Bruce Hart was making Kerry pay for coming to the shows, not less than ready to work kind of thing. But there's a lot of stories he could probably tell, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of those at CAC in a couple of weeks.
That sounds like really fun, and just wow, just the stories that you're telling me about these, you've told me stories in the past before, but I've never heard these stories before. Like it's so fascinating just to hear like some of these stories, especially when you mentioned ECCW.
Yeah,
I just went back just thinking about like some of the names that were at that time, like Adam Firestorm, God rest his soul, and thinking like Ladies' Choice, Dr. Luther, Juggernaut, gorgeous Michelle Starr, like Black Dragon, like those guys. I was just thinking about stuff like that, and but now before we started recording, you told me that that you got hurt while wrestling. I don't know if you're okay with me talking about that, but it's like where did your wrestling career end but you continued as doing like commentary or ring announcing. Like
So
where, like,
my last actual physical show was 2011 with Tommy Celsius was at that time booking for BCW in Tigard, Oregon, and I
mm,
wrestled a guy on that show called Keith Atkins.
mm,
Um, Keith was being groomed for the next BCW championship. So, originally Keith wanted me to go over. I said it doesn't make sense for me to do that. So I said let's just have it a schmoz, have some guys interfere, so that way you can sort of preamble your way up to your championship fight. Which would be a better thing in my opinion. I wasn't in shape at all. I mean, I'd been out of the game for a few years, just doing color commentating and for well, let's see. I did Dan Closter's in WWA uh,
yeah,
uh, at 105th and Sandy in a garage. And the matches were there. But I do want to quickly mention about ECCW. One of the interesting things was we did the shows originally on Vancouver Island in
mm,
1996, but it was 1997 that we decided that we would jump back to the mainland. There was a lot of people that wanted to see the shows there. And we ran a show at the Eagles Hall in New Westminster. Now, the Eagles Hall is an unusual building in that it almost looked like an apartment complex. It was built basically from the ground way up, but a lot of the stuff was underground. A lot of stuff was way above. The bar itself was actually taking an elevator to get to,
oh,
which is very strange. It was an old movie theater. There was the Paramount and the Columbia Theater. The Columbia Theater was the where the Eagles Hall was. And I remember at that time when we first started the shows there was another promotion that had run some shows at the Eagles Hall before, and they'd done not great, but we there was just something that we thought we could do something with. So the building was a 2-level building. There was like a couple stairs you had to go down into the main level of the dance floor, I guess, which we would nickname the Danger Zone because we reflected as where the wrestlers would come out and that sort of thing. So we'd
right.
have the Danger Zone, the general admission. Well, the Danger Zone would always sell out fast. I mean, I became the guy who would be delivering the tickets to a lot of these guys. One of them was Mike Willis, and the other was Sean Heaslip. Now, you go, well, who are Mike Willis and Sean Heaslip? Mike Willis would later become Dropkick Murphy, who passed away, and Sean Heaslip would become Aaron Idle. Great, phenomenal talent. Something that very few knew about him was that he was actually legally blind. He could only see shadows, and it was amazing he was able to perform at the level he was able to do. But that's where they start coming to shows and fans and so on and so forth. And so they would buy, I mean, Mike would buy like 10 or 12 tickets at a time, and Sean Heaslip would probably about the same. And so those shows were always sellouts. But I'll never forget in New Westminster, they were doing sewer construction in front of the Columbia Theater all the way down to 6th Street, which was about 2 blocks away.
Mm,
And it's probably about 97 or 98 that Michelle Starr and Johnny Canuck became the Glamour Order of Discipline. And they were fighting against the Army of Darkness, which at that time was Abaddon, Kiva Mass, and Dr. Luther, Len Olson. And excuse me, they had tremendous battles. Well, we had a van carrying the ring truck, carrying the ring trailer with us. And so we park outside and we'd have to hump the boards over top and everything over top because there's a big 6-foot pipe that you'd have to do that was doing part of the sewer. Well, there was one night that Star said, we're going to take this outside. Well, I didn't know where they were going to take it outside too. Well, they took it outside the venue all the way down to 6th Street and are fighting in the middle of 6th Street. Fortunately, there was no cars running at that. But then they had to find a way to get back into the building again. All these fans had come out. So they're fighting in the ring trailer to climb over the ring trailer over this big, huge pipe to get back into the building. And actually, I have a picture somewhere of Dr. Luther climbing over the pipe, a bloody mess, trying to climb over the pipe, get back into the building. And everybody got back in the building. Just at that point, the cops showed up.
oh
And they're like
no.
going, we heard there was some big battle going on 6th Street. Do you see anything? No. And they end up leaving. So, there was another fun one there. But we had some good times with that. I mean, the Army of Darkness and the Glamour of Discipline, the feuds that they had were tremendous, and as a result, they put the Eagles Hall on the map, in ECCW on the map. I mean, everybody just was amazed at what they could do in terms of getting the people behind them. And I mean, I think the capacity of that building was 350. And I dare say that we had at least 500 in that building. I know we broke fire codes for sure. But the bar was happy because all those people would go up in intermission, have a few drinks, come back down and do the show, and they go up after the show and they'd have a few more drinks. And that bar was busy. And then it was sold to the Raymond Burr Society, who became, I don't think they're run their theater anymore, but we sort of lost a good thing. I mean, we've done some shows at Bridgeview Hall in Surrey on the other side of the river, but it didn't have that intimate feeling that ECCW did. I mean, it was like ECW in that way, in that there was that intimate bingo hall feeling. There's that intimate feeling where everybody was on top of each other, and it was just like there was some aura that you could get that just defied description. I mean, sure, there's some territories, but I don't think you'll ever be able to repeat an ECCW type show again.
Yeah, I've been to one ECCW show in my life, and yeah, just the vibe from there when I went there for the first time, I was just like, this feels like bigger than like any show I've ever been to. I went to it was at the RCC in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This was 2014.
Okay, so that was after our stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had run some shows at the Russian Community Center. Back in the day as well, before ECCW was sold. Scotty Mack and I can't remember the lady who took over.
Mary.
Pardon me?
Her name was, I believe, was Mary.
Yeah, Mary. Her son was one of the wrestlers as well. And so they'd taken over the shows. And then there was a bunch of problems that happened. And unfortunately, it ended up being a demise. And now now out of the roots of that have been, there's like 6 different promotions that run in Vancouver now that never happened before. So, and again, it's such a wide variety. You've got the Glam Slam that happens. You've got All-Star Wrestling. There's NEW. I can't remember some of the other promotions that exist, but I've heard of some of these other ones too.
Yeah. CAW, VIP, Pro Wrestling.
And that's not including Vancouver Island, which started Vancouver Island Pro Wrestling, but there's like now 365 and a couple of other ones that are doing shows. And nowadays, I just wish that we'd been able to get there, at that time, because, I'll tell you, the Victoria one was horrible. We ran the Esquimalt Legion, and it was like Trail BC. I'll get to that one in a second because that's an early one too. But Royal Canadian Legion in Esquimalt, you couldn't carry the ring into the building straight. You had to climb up a bunch of stairs to get into the building. So you're carrying all these big, huge ass ring posts and turnbuckles and everything else in there. That was horrible. The worst one for all time would be Trail British Columbia at the Kamiko Gym. We had Bad News Alan on that show, a couple of shows against Tim Flowers, and to get into the Kamiko Gym was one of the worst venues to get into because it was on the second floor of the building. But it's even better. You couldn't carry it even 2 floors because there were too many twists and turns in the building. You couldn't carry the boards in. So we had to carry them from downstairs to upstairs, a difference of about 100 stairs. What we created was a pulley system where we used ropes to pull the wood up into the venue. Fortunately, at that time, we had 4x8 sheets of plywood. They hadn't quite gone to the old ring that we ended up buying from Tom Bolin, who I'm trying to remember what his Tom Justice. And so we had these 4x8 sheets of plywood. There's 2 of us that were pulling up at the top, a couple of people at the bottom. They're helping get this board up there, I mean, it was about a 2-hour venue to unload and reload afterwards, because you had to make sure that it didn't slide down the stairs and fly out the door or something like that. Just wasn't a lot of fun. But that was back in the day, and of course, guys like Black Dragon were on the show, and Tim Flowers, and we just debuted Firefighter Adrian and his brother. They were on the shows there. Randy Taylor was known as the Trash Man.
Yeah.
And actually, we debuted the Trash Man before anybody else did. The story about Randy Taylor. So Randy Taylor had been just the proverbial guy that was just a good hand on shows, right? He was a great guy, but didn't have a persona about him. So John Parlett, who'd been, got involved with the WCCW days back ages ago as a fan, but he invested some money into it. And he thought, he says, you remind me a lot of a blue collar worker, somebody who would pick up my trash, the Trash Man. So he put it, Randy was walking out there because he was balding on top. So he'd wear a do-rag out there, wife beater t-shirt, ripped up jeans and wrestling boots. And so like a rope as a belt kind of thing. And he'd walk around with a garbage can, wear beer gloves, the mesh gloves to make him look like a garbage man, right? A little bit dirty on the shirt and that sort of thing. And I don't know why I still had it, but I had a Sesame Street record from 1969 at that time, which had I Love Trash, which was Oscar the Grouch, And so we played that as his theme music. You couldn't believe how over this was. I mean, it was amazing. He'd walk around the ring with a trash can, and people would walk up and put garbage in the can for him. They'd help clean up the venue. It was amazing.
That's cool.
And he was over like $1 million. And unfortunately, there was something else that contributed to the end of it. It wasn't his fault. But that was a character that John came up with. There was another one that came up with as well. John was a well-known dumpster diver. He would find stuff that defied description, and he'd find ways of incorporating into shows. He'd find like rolls of carpet underlay that he'd have as the mat for underneath the canvas for shows, so that way there was some padding in there, even though there really wasn't an awful lot. But he discovered these 2 green outfits one time. And Velvet McIntyre actually ended up making a couple of green masks for them. And they were the Magic Dragons. They were dragon outfits, these green tails and that sort of thing. And so they had the Magic Dragons. And they were over too, H&R Puff and stuff. It's like, back in the day. I never saw the show, but we called them Puff and stuff. And they were over. The kids loved them. They take the hoods, the googly eyed hood things off, and they'd wear with these green masks in the outfit. And the finish, of course, would be them hitting a guy with the tail, like a bud bump or something like that. But it was over. People liked it. I'll never forget. We were trying to come up with a name for Adrian Lester, who became Firefighter Adrian, and we were trying to figure out a name for him, because at that time Adam Firestorm became Adam Firestorm from Ellen Torch and the Torch. So Adrian borrowed the tights that Star had used back when he used the Inferno, and had gone down the line through Adam Firestorm and so on. So he was wearing those fire pants. So we were trying to figure out what we should call him. I said, well, we should probably call him a firefighter. And so we have a firefighter. What are we going to call him? And at that point, I don't know what slipped into my mind at that point, but all I could think of was Rocky Balboa, and him shouting out, "You're Adrian!" So because he was Adrian Lester, we call him Firefighter Adrian Balboa. And it worked. It was hilarious. But I'll tell you a quick story about Adrian. So he was a really, really nice guy. Let me tell you, phenomenal kid. But he was just breaking into the business. This is probably about 92, 93. Mm-hmm. We're in New Clunic, British Columbia, which is like a small fishing town on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And he's wrestling Tim Flowers on the show. And Tim does some dirty stuff to him, and so he says to Adrian, he says, "Go get the stick and challenge me to a new match and that sort of thing." Okay, fine. Adrian gets out of the ring and he goes into the broom closet, and we're all looking, and he's trying to find a broom. Well, I was trying to find the stick, and we're all just sitting there going, "Oh God, no." Eventually, he got the microphone, so it's like, but it was, those are humorous things. Other humorous things. For example, we were in Nanaimo, British Columbia for ECCW. Now, people remember Kurgan from the oddities in WWF at that time. But he had left the WWF, so he was working independently before he actually stopped doing that and going to movies and that sort of thing. But we had him for some shows because he was getting ready to go to Korea with Michelle Starr, with Jason the Terrible, Rafael Rodriguez, and Rick Patterson. And we had to find a way to get Kurgan to shows. Well, the only vehicle was available was mine. It was a Toyota Tercel hatchback. Can you imagine a 7-foot tall guy sitting in a Toyota Tercel? Basically, his seat is leaned way back so he doesn't hit his head on the roof of the car. And you got myself, beautiful Bruce, who is a 4'5" midget, Black Dragon, and myself in this car. Okay. And so there's a picture floating of all four of us in this car. It was ridiculous. But there was a time that we were up on Vancouver Island. We were coming back through Campbell River, and Kurgan wanted to listen to some music. Well, the problem was that there was a tape that was stuck in the car, and I couldn't get it out, and so we couldn't listen to the radio. So we had to just listen to this tape. Well, it was the soundtrack for Austin Powers, The Man of Mystery.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, so you've got Kurgan, listening to the songs and that sort of thing. Comes up for this one song where they sing Just the Two of Us, and you got Kurgan, just the two of us. You and me can make it if we try, just the two of us. And then you got beautiful Bruce in the background, you and I, and you got go, right on, buddy. And then, they were just hilarious listening to them. It was so funny. You walk into places and they thought that Bruce was Kurgan's son. It's like, oh God. And, those sorts of things will etch in your memories forever. And I'm so glad that we had them because they sort of made the days go by, especially when you're, traveling. Like we did one Northern Hill tour one time. Tony Candelo did the Northern Hill tours, which he'd take a school bus, rent a school bus, and travel from Winnipeg 20 hours to his first town. And he'd do all these towns on native reservations. Rick Martel did one of them. Adam Copeland did another. He'll tell you about that as well. But there were, we did this one Northern Hill tour. Michelle Starr organized this tour of us going Northern British Columbia, towns that All Star Wrestling had gone to back in the day. This is about 97, 98 or something like that. And we did 14 cities in 17 days, all over British Columbia. And it was so, setting up, tearing down, setting up, tearing down, setting up, tearing down, it's what we went through. But it was a labor of love. We loved it. Not any real money on it. It was just a labor of love. So, but those are some funny things to sort of kindle the memory, so to speak.
Hearing stories like that is like you said, it helped you guys. Like I bet, like on bad days or even on just lonely days, just hearing stories like that, that just probably helped a lot.
Well, what really helped actually was a show we did in 100 Mile House, BC. And we were gearing up. We were in Peter Skeen Ogden School, which at that time Kenny Lush was a student of. Yes, Kenny Lush, the same guy who now does hardcore music and punk music and so on and so on. But he wrestled a number of times as well. But it was there Juggernaut discovered when we pulled out the bleachers at the school, an old volleyball that was sort of deflated and so on and so forth. And we started kicking it around and having some fun with it. And one of the teachers walked in and he says, if you want it, you can have it. So I think it's like, okay. So we nicknamed it the Wild Ball, and we found a needle to actually get it inflated and so on and so forth. And Juggernaut would draw little characters all over this thing. And the whole deal was if you were hit by the Wild Ball, you have to sell whatever your body part was that was hit, and you have to fall on the floor and flop like a fish for like 10 seconds or so. And the Wild Ball was all over the place. Tony Casina can tell you about it. I mean, it's hilarious. But you know, the Wild Ball was really what it sort of took away from those. You know, after we set up, we were just, you know, a couple hours away from the show's start and that sort of thing, and we just tried to find things to do. So that's what we did, the Wild Ball. And the Wild Ball was really our outlet, so to speak, of good and the bad and everything else. So we, you know, but it was fun. You know, the Wild Ball was you know, our way of letting off steam, so to speak.
That sounds so fun, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like
I don't know
that's
where
not,
we came of it. I don't know.
like
I know we
that's
took it
not,
everywhere we went to on the road trip. So
so that always helped out, especially like
absolutely, yeah.
that's great. Those are fun stories to hear, and especially like stuff like that. It's just like wrestling's a tough business, and also it does not help. But hearing stories like this, just like it's a breath of fresh air sometimes.
Worst part about it is they want to say that we're all phony. We're all, you know, I don't even use that other 4-letter word, because I mean they've never been in the ring, and then all of a sudden they go, "Well, you're just going to hurt me if I get in there." Well, what am I going to do? I'm not going to not do what I do in the ring. You know, if I'm that close to somebody, I've got to hit you. You know, and so on and so forth. And then today's guys are taking these falls that are just, I've never seen anything like it, and they have really short careers as a result of it. They're forgotten about, but boy, you made your move there by jumping off a balcony.
Yes.
Tremendous. But at some point, your bump card ends, and when it does, you're done. And when it's done, you know, you can be in really bad shape. You know, I got out, not by my own accord. I was scheduled to do an announcing event for Casino Real at the CAC in 2018, and I had my first of 2 strokes in 8 days. As I was coming down the escalator, and that night I was taking the hospital. I was there for 6 hours. I came back that night, and Papa Stro and I actually did the strut off at the Red Zone Bar in the at the Gold Coast Hotel. But you know, 8 days later, I was at work, and I had the second stroke, and I was hospitalized for 6 weeks. They had to do surgery on me. The first time I went in for surgery was the day after I'd had the second stroke. And I remember waking up. I'm in the hospital. I'm in the hallway. I look up, and I see this guy whiter than white, you know, just covered in white, but he looks like about 90 years old. He says, "I can't go any further. I'm afraid I'm going to kill you." I'm going, "Oh, that's not so good." So I ended up being transferred to their hospital. I'm there for a few days and talked to the physician there, and surgeon there he says, "I think we can do this." He says, "But the mortality rate's high, you know, for sure."
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, if I live, I die, I die." And he says, "That's a pretty brazen attitude." I said, "What am I supposed to think? I pee in a box. I lay in a bed. I can't barely see. I can't walk. What am I supposed to do? It's an existence, not a life." And so, you know, he ended up talking to my late wife about that, and she said exactly the same thing that I told him. So a few days later, they did the surgery, and I remember waking up. I was out in the lobby again. A nurse passes by me and gives me these 2 thumbs up. I go, "Okay, so I'm still here. Okay, we're doing all right." So anyway, I'd see the surgeon probably about a half hour later, and he says, "Oh, you're awake." I said, "Yep." He says, "We got the Holy Grail." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, both sides of your cerebellum were completely blocked. So you're only getting blood flow from the carotid artery to your brain, 10% blood flow. He says, "We were able to knock one of the blood clots out without it going to your brain and causing an aneurysm, which would have killed you. But we were able to knock that blood clot out, and it's gone." He says, "And at that point, the artery opened up, and we were able to shove a stent in there. So I have a stent in one side of my brain to allow blood flow." And so I have that. rehabilitation has been interesting. I've had some good moments and bad moments. I still walk with a cane because my balance sometimes goes out. Um, I wear prescription glasses now, but I could get dollar store glasses if I wanted to. The prescription is not that high. Even though
Mhm.
when I was in hospital, I was legally blind. Uh, I'm able to swallow again. I wasn't able to swallow or eat anything for about a year. I was on
Oh,
a nasal
jeez.
tube first and then a peg tube. But they drill that into your stomach. And I was feeding on that for like 9 months before actually I was able to eat again. And so there's still moments I go through, which any stroke victim can go through. But I guess we can be thankful that I'm still here and still able to
Yeah.
provide you with some information, some stupid and good and otherwise.
I mean, yeah, I'm thankful that you're still here with us, man. Like every time I saw you at round table, I always loved talking with you. You were always fun to be around with. Well,
Well, I try to be fun. I think a lot of it happened for me. I changed a lot after the strokes. I became understanding about mortality.
mhm,
And so one of the things that I did when my wife passed away um, in 2022 was from her life insurance. We bought 20 lifetime memberships at the Cauliflower Alley Club. And now it's up to 23 of the CAC. They're lifetime members. Some of them are Canadian, some are American, and so on and so forth. But they were all friends of either myself or Kathy. Some of these people do still come to CAC, which is great. Um, but since then, I've also had 10 people, plus two more recently, that are now lifetime members of the Hall of Fame at the Dan Gable Museum. So when you add up everything, it's like 35 people that I've made lifetime members. And not that I'm rich or anything like that, but it's just, I want to try and procure that. We were talking about that generation gap. We don't want to be forgotten. And
yeah.
so um, at the CAC, you're on the website forever. At the Hall of Fame, you're on like one of those placards you see on your office doors
Hmm.
with your name on it at the Dan Gable Museum. And so people can remember who you were. They may not know who you are specifically, who is that name or that name, but you're still there, so you're not forgotten about. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that if people contribute to become either lifetime members of the Hall of Fame or the CAC, they'll do themselves a good favor. Number one, it helps the benevolent funds, which helped me when I recovering from the strokes for the CAC, and it also helps to in the Hall of Fame in the museum keeps it going. I mean, it requires a substantial amount of income to keep the lights on and the museum going. So
Hmm.
we appreciate everybody's assistance in that. So if you go to caulifloweralleyclub.org or the Tragos Hall of Fame, you contact the Dan Gable Museum for the donation in Waterloo, Iowa. They would greatly appreciate hearing from you because they do a good wonder in helping everybody else.
Yeah. I always heard nothing but positive things about the Cauliflower Club. I've always wanted to go
I
to.
never did. I never did. It wasn't until 2014 that I went to my very first one.
Mhm,
And I've been told for years you should go. And it was
mhm.
at the insistence of Ron Hutchison and Ricky Ataki that convinced me to go. Um, because I always thought it was for the elite. I always thought it was for guys who'd been like the WWE guys or the NWA
Yeah.
guys or whatever, or worldwide. And here I was none. And that event there they did at the Gold Coast. Now they're doing it at the Plaza Hotel. Um, it was really unique because the wrestlers were of the same plane. We were all the same level. Uh, so it didn't matter. I mean, nowadays it's become a little more slighted a little bit, to some of these guys who think they're elite and that sort of thing. But back in the day, I mean, you could talk to like Silver Destroyer, for example, or you could talk to Sergeant Slaughter, or you could talk to Jared Jarrett or Jeff Jarrett or whatever, and they were just like you and I having this conversation right now. And there's still a lot of that. I think a lot of that happens more so at the dinners and the and those sorts of things, as opposed to the fan fest kind of thing, which
Yeah.
happens in a nostalgia room, where they can sort of the restaurants make their money and that sort of thing. But the dinners, I think everybody sort of is equal there, and because of that, it becomes a much more flowing atmosphere, and it's a sight to behold to see all these people all dressed up in suits that you've normally seen in these outrageous outfits and so on of wrestling. And they're dressed up like, unbelievable. Wait till you see the one I've got for this year for CAC people. If you're going to CAC, it's their 60th anniversary. So we're going back to 1965, psychedelic era. You can imagine what the suit's going to look like.
Well, I look forward to seeing.
I give you that heads up now.
I look forward to seeing the pictures. I look forward to seeing those.
Rock Riddle and I always have a competition. Who's going to be the best dressed? This last go round, I went out to the Waterloo, Iowa, and I wore a suit of all blue and black dots and patches. It was wild,
That sounds great.
Wait till you see this one.
I can't wait to see the pictures. I look forward to them. But Bulldog, I want to say thank you for taking the time for being on this show. Hearing your stories, it's just like, I feel like we could even make like a part 2 down the road, like, because I feel like you got more.
The thing is, I'm in the process of, I've been dealing with this for the last few years, and I pick it up and I put it down, pick it up, put it down. It's actually putting together a book, not because of the fact I want to be famous or something like that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to forget. I know that in my career, I've had several concussions that I know of. I've had my nose broken 3 times. I've had my ribs cracked. It's just part of the business. I'm not sitting there as a badge of honor with all the injuries and that's right.
No, yeah.
It's just part of the nature of what you do. But you don't see those. You don't see. You may see an arm in a sling, or you see a guy in a cast, and he's had some injuries. They don't know about strokes. They don't know about your nose being busted or your concussions or something like that. And there's a lot of guys that can talk about that. We're now hearing more and more about CTE. Who knows, what lies in that brain of mine. I don't want to know, but I feel very sorry for those who've experienced it, because it's not a pleasant thing to go through. Especially when you're sort of alone and nobody talks to you about things. One of the good things is that after Kathy passed away, I end up. It took me a couple of years to do it, but I finally got into a new relationship, which I was thrilled at being able to do. And actually, we're getting married at CAC on Sunday at Sin Bodhi's Wrestling on the Fly.
Oh, that's cool.
So if you're there live and in person watching the show, there may be a little thing that goes on before that event that you'll see. But it's May 6th's first time to Las Vegas, and I'm sure she's going to be scared to death when she sees this, because it's wilder than she could have possibly imagined.
Just make sure there's no wedding present that has a cobra in it from Jake Roberts.
Well, yeah, I met Jake several years ago at CAC. Really, really nice guy to be able to talk to. Of course, he's had his demons and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. He got through with his with DDP yoga, which was phenomenal. A lot of guys end up doing that. Scott Hall was another one. And you saw it really contrast when I saw him at after he'd gone through with DDP yoga versus what he had when they inducted. I can't remember it was who they inducted. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall were there with X-Pac, I think, doing some sort of award there. But Scott was in really rough shape there. But seeing him following that was really a good thing, and it's tremendous that so many of these people have gotten to that level that they've been able to turn themselves around. You're not going to be able to take away, unfortunately, the hurt that they may have caused throughout that time. But going forward, they will have those chances. And that's why I've tried very hard. I run the cribbage tournament at CAC and at Waterloo to bring history back to our business, a little camaraderie and that sort of thing. I just try to have some involvement in shows, I try to have involvement in events and so on and so forth. I'm always happy to provide people with information if they want to know. Sometimes the filters are off, especially with strokes. Sometimes I'll say things that shouldn't be said, but I'll say them anyway. Um,
Yeah.
but I'd love to hear from people. So, I mean, if anybody wants to drop me a mail, they can do that at Bulldog Bob Brown Jr. 1 at yahoo.com. Facebook, they can come and say hi. Love to hear from you. Obviously, see me if you're at Pal Pro Wrestling at the color commentator spot. Love to see you there. I try and get there as often as I can for Pal Pro Wrestling. I've been to DOA a few times so people can see me there. I talked to Patty recently, and I'm hoping that at some point I'll be able to go to a BCW show. I'm still around, sometimes square, sometimes rectangle, but I'm around today. Um, you know, so, anybody who wants to be able to chat old school, love to talk about because it's what history has been, what we continue to be, and really, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Bill after wrote that book, is wrestling fixed? I didn't know it was broken. Pretty much that's what it
That's
is.
a good title. That's a good
But
title.
yeah, I'm in the process of writing my own book through Mike McCurdy. Mike and I are still putting together. I think it's like 140 pages in
Oh
right now
wow.
of text. Some of the stories that I've talked to Hugh about here now are in the book, more expanded upon. Um, but I'd love to be able to get that out there just because I want people to see what life was like. I know I'm not as big a territory guy as some of those other guys in like Florida or Georgia or Texas that could talk to you some stories that would, shudder your mind, to say the least. But we had some fun along the way. That's a good
Yeah.
thing, because life is too short, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true. Like you said about like that you like to remember all the stuff like writing this book. When you said that, it just made me kind of think like I'm kind of like that too with my YouTube show with all the
Yes.
guys who I've had interviewed. Like I could tell you like who the first ever person I actually interviewed. That it was Pat Kelly.
Yeah.
Pat Kelly was the first guy I ever interviewed on my show.
Pretty nice guy to talk to.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and then after that, just like going through some of the old stuff, like all the interviews I did, especially like the ones you saw in my intro,
Yeah.
like those were just like so fun memories. Like especially like I love to remember them all. I'm so happy to have this YouTube channel
And
just
hopefully
to
some of those people will take a look back at some of those interviews, not just because nostalgia wise, but there's little nuggets that are hidden in a lot of those interviews. Both passion, about heart. Um, they paid a huge price for doing what they loved, and you know, I think wrestling is kind of an unusual anomaly, other than unlike football or baseball or basketball. Guys that retire all the time. That happens. Um,
Mhm.
and they can seem to walk away from it. There's just something about our business we can't. Um,
Yeah.
Roddy Piper had two analogies. He would tell you two stories. He would tell you. First one was that wrestling is a sickness. You can't recover from it. Just is, and it just depends on how you're going to get cured from it. So, um, the other thing is, and that I use this adage for me from recovering from the strokes, and I use the heaven doesn't want me because they think I'm going to be too rambunctious, and hell doesn't want me because they think I'm going to take over. You know, and you can see Piper saying that, and that's but
Mhm.
that's pretty much what it is. That's the reason why a lot of us are still here, not because we're any good, but because neither place wants us. They're too afraid what we're going to do once we get there. Um, there's a few of them that um, are there, and I'm sure they're causing up a storm.
Yeah, very true. Like I
Sandy
love wrestling.
Martino carry on or Matt Bourne.
Oh, Matt Bourne. I remember meeting Matt for the first time. Um, I couldn't tell if the guy was like legitimately nuts or crazy, but every time I met him, he was always nice to me. Same with Piper. Piper was always nice to me too. Like
I
every
never
time
got to meet him. I've had some experiences that aren't necessarily pleasant per se,
yeah.
but with Matt, quick story on him. So he was recovering from his demons at that point. And at that time, had moved from Pennsylvania out here, and my late wife Kathy brought him into our house, removed all the liquor from our house too, and just we couldn't offer any demons. But you know, you got to see a side of a person that you didn't really know. For example, one day I'm on the computer like I am now, and I'm looking at a web page, and Matt looks over at me and says, "What are you looking at?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking at wrestlers who died before age 40." He says, "Really?" He says, "Can you print that out?" So I printed it out. He says, "Can you bring it over here in a pencil?" Sure. And 5 minutes later, he says, "Look at this." He says, "3/4 of these guys I worked with, I should have been gone before any of them." And there's a pretty stoic moment there, of knowing what he'd done, what he'd gone through. And I know, he worshiped his kids. Tegan and Matthew were his bread and butter. Maybe not so much with Michelle, but he really loved the kids, and he wanted nothing but the best for them. And it's strange. You say that, you see this gruff old exterior of a guy, but he's as humble as he can be. There was a story one time, and I'll tell you it only because of the fact that I think that it's important that people know Matt's softer side. There was a time that Matt wanted to go and visit his dad in Milwaukee, and Kathy and I took him to meet his dad, and they were inside, and Kathy and I waited in the car because Matt said, "I'll just be a few minutes," and he's there talking to his dad, and then you see Matt help Tony get up from his chair, and assist him, because he needs to go to the bathroom, and then help him back into his chair, just really loving and tenderly. Not this big gruff, crazy maniac that you'd expected. And it was we were very quiet in the car on the way home, but you could see that he was emotionally charged from that situation there with his dad, and his dad would pass shortly thereafter. But it was that sort of human side that maybe a lot of people didn't get to see. And that's the problem with a lot of us. What you see at the events isn't necessarily what we are. It may be, but it may not be. But to carry that and do that for as long as we do we're unlike anything else you'll ever see. Anything.
Yeah. Like for me, when I met him, I think the reasons why I say I couldn't tell if he was like in character or not, I think it's just because for me, it's just like he probably just saw me like, a fan, so I had to stay Matt Bourne. I gotta still be. But every time I saw him, he was just like nice guy, really nice.
And the thing is that he worked very hard. At the very very tail end, he was staying at our house. He was working construction. Guys loved him because he was immensely strong. I never even saw him go to the gym, but he was incredibly strong. Although I do know he went to the gym at least once. There was a lady friend of ours that was living next door to us at the townhouse, and he and Brian would go to the gym every so often. And Brian was a former sheriff's guy in Clackamas County, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But he and Matt had a really close bond, and I think it was a lot just because he wasn't Dwight the Clown, he wasn't Maniac Matt Bourne, he was just simply Matthew Osborne, and he was a guy living next door, and a couple of guys, getting together and talking and whatever else. It really was remarkable. And unfortunately, when he passed, Brian saw it, and it devastated him. And a couple of years later, he passed too. and it was sad and shocking to see, that, and the deaths really hit us hard. I mean, it's like that when you go to CAC and they do the roll call of passings, and you see even on the website for the RIP and that sort of thing. I don't think a lot of people realize it until they see those names on the screen. How hard it can hit you. I just talked to him the other day on the phone. I meant to call this person. I meant to talk to somebody, and now they're not here anymore. And so I think that makes a huge difference for a lot of people. Um, it brings them back to a reality check. Just not to end on a downer note, but I mean, I think that's the reason why I think the CAC and the Hall of Fame do such a good job, is that they give us an opportunity to bring out those moments which you might otherwise forget. And so I'm hoping that at one point the book will be published. I'm hoping for next year. I've been trying to do this for the last couple of years, um, just because I'd like to sort of rekindle my stories and that sort of thing, rekindle some of the events, have some fun. Um, I don't know if I'll make $1 or $2 out of it, but hey, I'd just like to, say to people, hey, look, we were here, we are here, at least we
Mm.
are here right now. We were here, and we're continuing to be here because of what we've done.
Yeah, you when you mentioned about about the wrestlers passing, it made me just remembered. We mentioned this name earlier. Dropkick Murphy.
Yeah.
I was really good friends with Murphy. Love the guy to death. I was gonna try to ask him if he ever wanted to be a guest on my show, but when I found out that he passed, I that killed me because I loved Murphy, and um, out of
Recently,
all
we
the
lost another one in the Great Kasaki.
yeah, Greg
Anthony Fujimura
Kisaki.
was another one that went way too soon.
Mm,
When Adam Firestorm led the list of those who left our world because of what had happened. When you add Dropkick Murphy and Anthony Fujiwara on there, Fujiwara, uh, there's countless others. Again, talk to people. There's no shame in you talking to people. You don't have to explain how much you hurt. Just talk to them. Just
mm,
know that we're here. Um, you know, because now that makes several people that I've lost in that vein. And my first one that I lost was in 1998, um, and it was devastating then as it is today. Um, so again, I think that's why it's important I go to these things like the CAC and Hall of Fame Waterloo, because um, I don't want to say it be my last time seeing some of these people, but it might be. And I want to remember the good times and
mm.
remember the moments. And I think that for people out there, we should remember the moments. We should remember the events. We should remember uh, those guys, even though they'll be forgotten. The sad part is that they become a footnote in our history. But we have things like your show, for example, that allows us to continue perpetually. Maybe you float back into time and you start looking through YouTube stuff or StreamYard, and you start seeing all these different interviews and episodes and so on. Oh, I remember that guy. I remember that guy. And all of a sudden it conjures up some memories. So um, that's why I like doing these, is because, some people say, oh, you can make a few bucks out of it, whatever else. It's not the money. It's the opportunity to be able to bring to everybody's attention that, hey, we're here. Talk to us when you can, and still remember us when we're not here.
Yeah, it's like you remember when I told you that I got burnt out and I was dealing with a
Yeah.
lot. I text Scotty. I text him and I messaged him, "Hey, I'm sorry I haven't really messaged as much. I just been going through a lot." And he's just like, "Bro, you never have to apologize for not messaging me. If you ever
But we
need
do.
anybody,
We do
yeah,
apologize, though.
I know, but he was just like you never have to apologize to me if you ever need anybody to talk to. Doesn't matter what time it is. I'm always gonna be here. Like I may not have like the to cure to get away remove the pain, but I'm always here to talk.
I think the biggest cure, though, is being able to know that there's somebody there.
Yeah.
'Cause a lot of times you feel alone. You feel that that everything's on you, that there's nobody around. Um, quick Matt Bourne story that just reminded me of All Alone. So Matt was at our house and recovery, and I remember Howard Finkel, late Howard Finkel, had called us and was asking, how things were going, and I said, yeah, no, everything's going fine here. I said, we've taken everything out of the house that Matt doesn't need, and he was really thankful for that, and got us in touch with another lady. I can't remember what her name was. There was another lady that was involved. I think it was Lisa or something like that. That was involved with the wellness stuff, and so they had come upon this place of going to, I think it was an Alcoholics Anonymous place they wanted to go to. And so they were going to go that night. Kathy and Matt were going to go to this one place in Vancouver, Washington. They get there, and there's a dance going on there. And they're like, I thought this was the sobriety meeting. Well, it is. It's a dance event. Are you here for the dance? They look at each other. No. And they quickly left, But, it was like, you could just imagine Matt trying to dance. It's just like, yeah, exactly. Exactly. You've got the same feeling that I do. But it's that sort of thing, the memories that like that sit in you, that, back in our day, we didn't have the wrestling schools. We didn't have the overhead places with the air conditioning. I know when I first trained, I was out in the backyard in a ring. Matt Bourne trained guys in the backyard at his dad's house and Tony's house. You'd have to set up and tear down the rings so that the backyard could be used by other people. So you got that experience for sure. But it was that camaraderie, that experience that you had there, which I think led to a lot of us, understanding and getting to know each other a little better and dealing with the issues that we were dealing with. I think that's a big thing for a lot of people nowadays, is that they don't have they go into a school, the ring's already there, they get dressed, they go in the ring, they dance around for a couple hours or whatever else, they get dressed and they go home. There's not that camaraderie. I mean, they may text each other, they may message each other, Facebook, but there's not that time together. And that time, you hear about guys in the WWF, for example, who'll be driving from town to town. You get relationships there. And I don't mean, loving relationships. I mean friendships, lasting friendships.
Yeah.
That turn into stories, that turn into memories, that turn into book material, Facebook material, etc. Thank God we didn't have social media back in the day, because I don't know we would have survived. Because there was some stuff we couldn't do nowadays. I mean, you're hearing, like, was it Tony Atlas, I think, has been doing these shoot interviews about talking about Dick Murdoch and his Ku Klux Klan stuff.
Yeah. Oh boy.
And sending him off on a wild goose chase with him and Tommy Rich out to a plantation place where Tommy says, get down. And Tony's like, what the hell? So he gets down. All of a sudden, he looks up in the back window and can see this guy with a Ku Klux Klan outfit on. And it's like, oh, geez, what are you doing? And Dick's like, I didn't know you were going to actually go. It's like, Jesus Christ, But,
God.
But that sort of thing. So as I said, take a look at all your past interviews for people. Take a look at all the YouTube videos. Soak up as much knowledge as you can, because, the world is your oyster nowadays. Social media is good, but the old-fashioned, knocking on doors, getting out there, telling people who you are, helping tear down some rings is good. Just be part of the package. Eventually maybe you can get to the next level, but the percentage of guys getting there is very small. Realize that, and just realize that you have one bump card. When it's full, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't anything more you can do. It's just, we see guys who are trying to push it further than they should. You know, mention guys like Bushwhacker Luke. Nice to be able to see. Shouldn't be in a ring,
Yeah.
It's great to have him behind a table, autographs, pictures, whatever else, memories. But I saw a recent show, and it's just like, it was a sad representation of what he was, what he could be. Not to say he's a bad person, but that's not the memory I want to remember him by.
I felt the same way about like when Ric Flair had his retirement match. I
Yeah.
felt that way. That's how I was feeling.
Or even Sabu with that match, he didn't have to go to that extreme, even though he was that extreme. I
Mm-hmm.
remember, he was at CAC one time. He was just sort of sneaking in the door, looking for a bite to eat kind of thing. And we had room at our table. And he had, he's very, very quiet, very polite, asking if he and Jeannie could sit at the table, Super Jeannie. And, we said, absolutely. We had a couple of chairs. Go ahead and sit down. So, you see him munching down the salad, the food, and everything else. And then as quick he was there, he was gone. But that's just the way he was. He was not that much of an orator. When we met him I met him for the first time for an ECCW show in Vancouver, Washington, when he worked against Steve Carino.
Mm-hmm.
He was very, very polite, very quiet though. Just the exact opposite to this crazy, wild, guy you'd see. But that's just the thing, is that you don't get to see them that way.
Yeah. That's true. He always seemed like a quiet guy, even like when when you're watching one of his matches. Like he always seems like he was always like quiet, not
He
like
was.
not on
He was
purpose,
at
but
this
he's just.
mantra. Him and the Sheik never spoke English, right? So
Mm-hmm.
for him to be able to talk at all, excuse me, it's a big deal, right? So
Yeah.
him, he didn't converse a lot. I don't know the relationship he had with Super Genie, but I know that he cared very deeply for her when she had that amputation, and then shortly thereafter lost her battle. He was absolutely devastated by it, and getting to the next level where he had that final match. That one more match thing. There's always that inkling. Sometimes you always want that one more match. You want to be able to go out the way you want to, but I think it should be, when you're still able to do what you would need to do.
Yeah.
Guys like Ric Flair, guys like Bushwhacker, Luke, etc. Guys, Jimmy Valiant. You don't need to. You've proven yourself over and over and over again. You don't need to continue. You can live on your legacy. We all know who you are. We all know that you did tremendous for our business, and then some. Mick Foley got out a little bit too late, but he's still early enough in his life. He can go do seminars and meetings, and he can do some things, but he knows his limitations. You're not going to see him throw that big nasty elbow, for example, out of the ring. You're not going to see him do anything silly except for the Sacco, right? He'll do that. But he won't go crazy in matches because he knows it's not going to be good, and so a lot of these guys, I appreciate, the effort that these guys do, but geez, we don't need to be Randy the Ram per se, and you get one more match in, and all of a sudden it's just not there anymore, and that could have happened to me when I had the strokes, but the fact is that I knew when it was time to walk away. I'm very thankful, though, when people do come up and they do talk to me about the good old days. It's great. It's great that you reach out, for example, to talk to me because I do appreciate communicating to people, and I do appreciate having the opportunity to stress what we've done over in the past, but also realize at that time that these people, learn from our mistakes and don't repeat them. There's so many of those repeated mistakes. You don't need to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Bulldog, I want to say thank you for taking the time for being
Sorry
a
for
guest.
keeping it so long. Sorry, people.
No,
I know you guys should have other
no.
things to do.
No, that's another thing. Is just like I got invested, even if it took so long. I still enjoyed listening to the stories. And again, I want to say thank you for being a guest on the show. I really do appreciate it. And
Well, I appreciate being here. And as I said, anytime that people want to write or email or message or whatever else, love to hear you, or CAC. Quick story, quick one. I promise.
Okay.
I keep offering these, but hey, cribbage for the first time in 2014 at the CAC. And
Hey,
Bill
Julia.
White and I are playing some cribbage. He wrestled as the Rebel Bill White when he was out here in Portland as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm playing cribbage, and this guy comes up to me, and he's in the cribbage tournament, and he says, "You're Bulldog Bob Brown Jr., aren't you?" And I'm like, yeah. I'm thinking, I don't know if there's bad things or good things.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "I remembered you from a match that you had in Everett, Washington." I'm going, the last time I wrestled in Everett was 2001. The year is 2014. You've been to, I've seen this guy before at other shows. So I know you've been to hundreds of other shows before. What stood out? Why did I stand out to you? And it's amazing that people do that. I remember this match from so and so and so far. And there's some that I've seen on YouTube and so on that I don't even recall matches happening or seen. Vince Nevada sent me a list of matches that I'd had, and I don't remember some of these. Maybe that's from being hit in the head too much. I don't know. But it's great though to have those memories, that I'd stuck in somebody's head for that long. And it's a remarkable thing. I played him a couple times at CAC. He lives, I think, in Vancouver, Canada. I saw him actually a couple years ago when I was at All Star Wrestling in Vancouver. I bumped him there, and we chatted a little bit there too. But it was amazing. We sort of basically left off where we took off where we left off, kind of thing. And it was really amazing. So I appreciated that, and I do appreciate people having those communications and so on and so forth. I appreciate talking to people and you and these others that do these, because I like to talk about the old school. I like to talk about what we need to do, and I like to talk about some history that's not. You hear some ribs that aren't so nice. I mean, Mr. Fuji was well known for some not so nice ribs, but the comical stories, definitely, you gotta love some of them.
Sure.
There's some that are other people's to tell, and I'll let them tell them.
Yeah, for sure. I love listening to stories like that. And again, I look forward to when the day your book comes out, whenever that is. Let me know. So I like to buy a copy.
Absolutely, I will let you know. And of course, everybody else, feel free to keep monitoring me so I can get this thing done.
Oh, hey, Julian, what's up, brother? How you doing? I hope you're enjoying the show. But thank you, Bulldog, for being on the guest. I loved listening to your stories. It was fun, and I appreciate you. And hope to see you around at the show again soon.
I will look forward to seeing you at a show, and anybody else that sees a show, feel free to come up and say hi, because I don't bite. Maybe an occasional nibble, but I won't bite.
Just a little. He sometimes does.
Just
sometimes.
All
right. Well, thank you, Bulldog, for being on here. And thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. oWo is back on YouTube. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Oregon Wrestling Observer. Follow me on Twitter and go like the Oregon Wrestling Observer Facebook page.
We'll see you at the matches.
See you at the next matches. See y'all later.
Broken bones from parts unknown, simplify wonders of why, broken promises reveal.